In this video, we look at the costumes of Tyrion Lannister, one of the most enduring protagonists on the HBO series Game of Thrones. Coming up. Welcome back to another episode of Costume Co. If this is your first time here, I do almost weekly videos analyzing movies and TV shows from a costume perspective. I'm now also live streaming every Saturday night. In this episode, I examine the costumes of Tyrion Lannister, portrayed by Emmy Award-winning actor Peter Dinklage from all 7 seasons of Game of Thrones. Warning, there will be major spoilers for all 7 seasons of Game of Thrones. When we first meet Tyrion Lannister in Season 1, he is clean-shaven with shaggy blonde hair. Actor Peter Dinklage didn't want a beard because he felt that it was too stereotypical in fantasy to see a dwarf with a beard. Tyrion wears a standard ensemble, despite the changes in textures and colors that will carry him through for the most part until the end of Season 7. His blonde hair, of course, easily identifies him as a Lannister. That part is taken from the books, but of course, it's also an important plot point to the story. I don't have verification on this, but it appears that Dinklage dyed his brown tresses at least in Season 1, and then to a lesser degree as the story advanced. Despite his great wealth and social status, Tyrion really only wears one costume in the first season with a few add-ons. It is, however, a good quality costume. The idea is that someone with his means can afford to have his clothes custom tailored to his unique size. Despite being a fantasy story, the clothing of Westeros is rooted in the medieval times, and we see that especially in the North, with the designers wanting the actors to look like they're wearing clothes and not costumes. So Tyrion's costumes, they're dated more about the Tudor era, which is a period of time between 1485 and 1603, when the Tudor dynasty ruled in England. The quilted tabs of his costume are slightly more medieval, although, like many of the Lannister costumes, are Japanese-inspired. Tyrion's main costume, like the one we see here, is pretty much consistently a doublet, jerkin, knee breeches, shirt, stock tie, and boots. It's likely, however, that there were duplicate costumes at different stages of the breakdown, depending on what section of the journey Tyrion was at. So I'll explain more about these key pieces throughout the video. Dinklage explains that his costume helped him in preparing for the role in Season 1, saying, "You put somebody who's not tough like me in leather and he suddenly thinks he's tough. I wear leather all 10 episodes. One thing I should mention before I proceed is that actor Peter Dinklage is vegan, and while I can't confirm this, I think that he did wear leather, at least for the first 3 seasons. All of the Lannisters dress in reds and golds, and Tyrion is no exception. This gold-embroidered red leather vest is called a jerkin, and according to the Museum of London, jerkin refers to a sleeveless outer garment for a man, which is mostly, if not always, made of leather. Jerkins were popular in the second half of the 16th century and were worn over a doublet, a sort of short jacket with long sleeves. And I believe that the gold metallic embroidery seen here is done by machine, since principal embroidery artist Michelle Carragher doesn't have it featured on her website on her Game of Thrones gallery. Here's an example of a Tudor leather jerkin in excellent condition that dates from 1550 to 1600, and it's from the Museum of London. And according to the museum, they state, such practical and decorative garments were highly fashionable from the mid-1500s, and those made from Spanish leather were particularly prized. Jerkins were worn by both men and boys, but by the late 1500s were also popular with women. This jerkin, like Tyrion's, features a stand-up collar, a short tab skirt, and shoulder wings, which are sort of like an extended epaulette over the shoulders. And I'll add that the Stark men, like Bran and Ned Stark, also wear this popular Tudor-style clothing. Not all jerkins are made from leather. Here's an example of a silk jerkin from the Met in New York. It's dated from the early 17th century, and according to the museum, in consultation with the Arms and Armor Department, determined that this jerkin may have been worn under armor due to the abrasion pattern visible across the garment. Under the leather jerkin, Tyrion wears a black leather doublet with a stand-up collar, like we see him wearing with this cloak. The doublet was a close-fitting garment worn over a shirt and under the jerkin. This jacket has crisscross lacing through black metal grommets at the center front that start at the bottom, and then it's tied in a bow at the top, with the extra lacing hidden inside the collar, all neat and tidy-like. Here's an example of an English doublet from the Victorian Albert Museum in London that's made between 1615 and 1620. So this hand-sewed doublet is made from watered wool, silk taffeta, linen, and whalebone. And according to the museum, the close-fitting sleeves are typical of the period, and the doublet reflects the new high-waisted style for men. Shoulder wings and waist tabs are stylistic details characteristic of doublets in the early 17th century. And here's an example of a sleeveless silk doublet from 1580 from the Met. The sleeveless doublet would later become the waistcoat, which was a popular item for men in the 1700s. In this scene, Tyrion's wearing a red jerkin over the doublet and then a short wool cloak on top. Costume designer Michelle Clapton had stated in a lecture at the Getty Museum that she had used IKEA rugs for some of the Black Watch, so it's possible that this collar is a woolly rug too. And as I mentioned before, Dinklage is a vegan. So Clapton stated of this in an interview with The Telegraph, certain actors won't wear it and will respect that and will always try to make it fake fur instead. But when you're depicting the things that we are a lot of the time, it doesn't work. So I think what she means here by this statement is because of the high def resolution and people are watching their shows on really large size screens, the costume team has a harder time getting away with less authentic materials. In episode 9, during the Battle of the Green Fork, Tyrion rallies the troops in partial Lannister armor worn over his red jerkin. His armor would be bespoke, although this would be true for most of the armor in King's Landing, where Clapton has stated that the city would have competition and Tyrion would have some choice as to where he would have his armor made. And she adds, the armor, all of it's handmade and hand-beaten. I've mentioned in previous videos that Lannister's armor isn't the best design for protection because they don't wear a mail shirt under their armor. And then here, Tyrion's not even wearing fauds, which are the metal skirts intended to protect the legs. So maybe this is for humor, but here he just has a small section of plates covering his groin. And with this particular set of armor, he's wearing plate pauldron, couter, and vambrace, which are the shoulder and lower arm sections of the armor. Tyrion's armor gets quite a beating, as we see here. Clapton has stated that for additional authenticity, soil and mud is collected from locations where they're shooting, like for a battle scene, and then it's applied to the armor and costumes, like we see here on Tyrion's armor. And you can also see the embossed line sigil here on Tyrion's pauldron. Looking like he's come right from the battle, Tyrion's armor is a carryover from Season 1 with all of the wear and tear. So he's wearing a peascod style plate cuirass, which is an imitation of the popular shape of the English doublet during the reign of Elizabeth I. So the shaping differentiates from that of the Lannister guards that we see here in the background, and then of Tyrion's father and Jaime, who wear the Japanese samurai-inspired lamellar-style plate armor instead. While there is a little bit of detail, we see an embossed lion on the front of the breastplate and on the shoulder guards, it's a far cry from the over-the-top ornately detailed armor of his nephew, Joffrey Baratheon. For the Battle of Blackwater, Tyrion's armor is cleaned up, and then they've added some additional pieces. So we have fauds to protect his legs. As I mentioned before, he didn't have them in the previous battle. And vambrace, which is the piece that covers the lower arms over his leathers. So I'm not sure why he doesn't have a gorget, which is the neck guard we see on both Tywin and Joffrey. And there might be likely some practical reasons why pieces get cut during the fitting or on set. And as Clapton has stated, that the actors have to be able to move in their costumes. But a nice detail on the armor is this chain of hands, which is meant to represent Tyrion's chain of office as Hand of the King. This particular chain of office was created for Lord Arryn, whose body laid in state in season 1, and it was made by Steenson's Jewelers. So according to their website, the chain of office is a half-meter long bronze chain of interlocking hands. This piece weighs over 200 grams of solid brass. It's constructed by a combination of CAD, hand carving, casting, and riveting. Unfortunately, I can't verify if they also created Tyrion's chain. Tyrion is holding a sword belt instead of on his body, so you see here it's all coiled up around the sword. Here's a studio shot of Tyrion's complete suit of armor, including his helm with the retractable visor. Actor Dinklage wore the helmet for just one quick scene. The red on the armor is so much more vivid without all the filters that we see in the show. Here, you see the detail of the embossed lion sigil and the chain of office. One very obvious choice by the production design team. Clapton has stated that she worked early on and very closely with Gemma Jackson to establish the cohesive look of the various regions of Game of Thrones, was that the colors are mostly taken from the family sigils. So for Lannister, for instance, the colors are crimson and gold as seen on both Tyrion and the Lannister soldiers, which is distinctive from the King's Guards who wear gold and white. Clapton said, you take each family and look at them and where they come from. You try to bring that into how they look. Through some research, I learned that the name Tyrion, although spelled slightly differently, is the name of a color, and it's sometimes called Tyrion purple or Tyrion red, which is a reddish purple dye derived from sea snails. And I thought it's likely that author George R.R. Martin knew of this, and that he probably passed that on to the costume design team. Tyrion purple may have been first used by the ancient Phoenicians as early as 1570 BC. So here's an example. It's a Byzantine mosaic depicting Empress Theodora from the 6th century, who was the wife of Emperor Justinian, and she's wearing a Tyrion purple cloak. So because the process of extracting the dye from the snails was very labor intensive, it was done by either milking or crushing the snails. The dye was very expensive and therefore limited to the imperial court, who also subsidized the dye stuff. While repurposing some of his clothes from season 1, in season 2, Clapton created a series of separates for Tyrion. So this was a way to extend his wardrobe and also establish the passage of time by giving him new looks. So for instance, in this scene, he's wearing a new jerkin, which is over his black leather doublet from season 1. Here's a close-up of the fabric. In some light, it looks like the color of oxidized blood, but it's actually a dark red and gold fleck brocade. While in this scene from episode 8, The Prince of Winterfell, Tyrion is wearing sleeves made from the same fabric as the jerkin. This new jerkin is made from laser-cut brown-black leather, and it's lined with the same fabric as the sleeves. In the Tudor period, these sleeves would have been attached by points, which are ribbons with metal tags, under the shoulder wings, which would hide them. Here are two examples of laser-cut lamb leather from NY Fashion Center Fabrics that are in the same design as Tyrion's jerkin. Unfortunately, these textiles are no longer available. Here's a close-up of the Tudor leather jerkin that I showed you earlier. Laser cutting or puncturing, it's modern technique, but in the Tudor period, they would have used a decorating technique called pinking, which is the stamping of decorative holes into the leather with a pinking iron. Here's a close-up of the front and back of the leather with the pinking details of hearts and stars. Historian Janet Arnold had suggested that the pinking technique was used to make the leather more pliable, while reenactor Scott W. Perkins of Garbs for Guys has stated that there are much easier ways to make leather more pliable and that he believes that the slashing and pinking was merely decorative. Here are a few pictures where the costume was on exhibit, and we see a good shot of the cravat at the top there, which is essentially a long length of fabric wrapped around the neck, and then also the front closures of the jerkin. Here's an example of this type of metal clasp that function like highly decorated hooks and eyes, and I found these on Etsy by seller Lionwood. I'll leave a link for that in the description. Here's a picture of the bronze Hand of the King pin, the same one worn by Ned Stark. Tyrion wears it on his right side as opposed to Ned Stark, who always wore it on his left side or over his heart. So you can take what you want from this, but it's likely that because Tyrion really has no love for the young Mad King, he is bound by duty and commanded into this position until his father's return. But as we'll see later, both Tywin and Qyburn also wear their pins on the right side. Tyrion returns in the Season 3 episode Valor Dohaeris wearing his costume from Season 2. And again in Episode 4, and now his watch has ended. And again in Episode 7. He does get this lovely new black brocade jerkin, cut in the same way as his other vests. He wears it over his black leather doublet, the same one from Season 1, although as I mentioned before, production probably made multiples. Here's a promotional shot from TV Guide of Dinklage wearing the costume with the leather quilted tab skirts and his burgundy red leather sword belt. The sword belt is much wider than his standard dress belt. Tyrion ties it Viking style, and as I stated in another video, I'd mentioned that with the exception of Peter Baelish, every principal male character wears their belt knotted in the same way and in a downward position. This belt also features a center front brass plate that's really a half width of Cersei's belt. Here's a close-up of the brocade detail and the clasps, just like from his red jerkin. Here's a head-to-toe promotional shot from HBO of the entire costume. He's wearing his dress belt instead, and I haven't mentioned the pants yet, but they are nearly always the same cut, and up to this point, always black. So I think they are likely made from a natural fiber, like cotton or linen or wool or a silk blend. And they are similar to the cut of breeches, laced up in the front, just slightly full on the thighs, and then tapered towards his boots, which are about mid-calf, I think. Here's a very rare example of a shirt and breeches set from the Museum of London. So this ensemble dates between 1600 to 1700, and it's made from linen and cotton. So this type of clothing called slops was worn by sailors from the late 16th century through until the 18th century. Tyrion gets a completely new garb for his wedding to Sansa Stark in the episode Second Sons. This crimson red leather doublet, almost the color of blood, has the same shoulder wings and tabs. This is the most vivid costume that we will ever see Tyrion in, and my thoughts are that someone like Tyrion's sister Cersei had this costume custom made for him in the same way that she designed Sansa's wedding gown. Clapton has used the same laser-cut leather for this costume, but it's dyed red instead of brown-black, and he's finished off the look with a silk jacquard cravat. And interestingly, his healing scar matches his costume. Non-functional fasteners seen here are actually brass lions. And I don't have a close-up of Tyrion's jacket, but here are the same lion sigil clasps from Joffrey's coat that he also wears to Tyrion and Sansa's wedding. The skirt is made from 4 tabs cut from the same fabric and lined in what looks like gold Dupioni silk, which give it a bit of luster, and then it's bound with the matching silk bias. For this formal look, Tyrion wears a skinny maroon dress belt. Oddly enough, Tyrion doesn't acquire any new clothes, so to speak, for Season 4. I've mentioned that most of Tyrion's costumes are interchangeable, almost like a capsule wardrobe. So here, for instance, Clapton matches up the red and gold flecked vest with their matching sleeves with the addition of his leather quilted skirt. This is another Season 3 costume that he wears in the season premiere, Two Swords. Clapton has added these matching skirts just like from his wedding jacket. It's actually the same pattern. One thing that I've learned from analyzing the costumes of Game of Thrones these last 2 years is that when Clapton finds a silhouette that she likes for a character, she uses it over and over again. Why create more work for yourself? The 4-piece tab skirt pictured here is lined in the same dark red and gold fleck brocade, the same fabrics as his sleeves, and then the skirts are bound with the bias of that same fabric. I wasn't sure if the tabs were attached to the jerkin or not, or worn as a separate piece, but from this close-up it appears that the bands are sewn to a hip band and then either tied onto his waist or attached on the inside with hooks or buttons. Tyrion wears this ensemble again for Margaery and Joffrey's wedding as well. Here's a close-up of Tyrion's ruby red stone signet ring in a gold setting. He's worn this ring since season 1. And on his left finger, he wears a silver or white gold lion ring. And you can find reproductions of this ring all over the web, like this titanium steel one on the right from Super Blinks. And Tyrion's rings are removed once he's imprisoned, and then we never see them again. Here's a good look at his shirt. It's a simple pattern. It's likely made from linen or a linen cotton blend, and then dyed a putty green color. The body of the shirt has one piece in the back and 2 pieces at the front, which tie up with laces at the center front. The collar is a slight stand-up style in keeping with his jackets, and then one-piece sleeves with slight gathers at the shoulder, and then elastic cuffs. This episode, The Lords of Gauze and Men, having sat in his own filth for days, Tyrion changes back into his black brocade jerkin and leathers. You'll see here that he's no longer wearing his rings. Tyrion continues to wear this look in episode 7, Mockingbird, and into his second trial by combat. His costume is extensively broken down here with grime and dirt, and they've added blood to his costume. When Tyrion is released from the crate by Varys in the Season 5 premiere, The Wars to Come, his costume is now thoroughly soiled and trashed. What's new is Tyrion's full beard. Actor Peter Dinklage refers to his new crop of face growth as his crate beard. When asked by Entertainment Weekly why he didn't want a beard for Tyrion in the first place, he said, "Well, I was referring to a beard that reached down to my knees in a sort of dwarf in Lord of the Rings way. This is a beard I've actually grown, so it's more Tyrion and not Gandalf." And I'll add that Dinklage has also grown out his hair considerably since season 1. While being harbored by Illyrio and Pentos, one of the free cities of Western Essos, Tyrion gets a bath and a fresh change of clothes. Dinklage states that Tyrion's on the run, he adapts to his environment and wears the clothes of the new place he's in. This type of loose-fitting clothing is Pentoshi style. We see this style of costume on the Pentoshi magistrates, as well as Varys, pictured here with Tyrion. Tyrion wears a gold-colored sleeveless surcoat with a geometric pattern over a muslin shirt and breeches. Tyrion's surcoat is built upon a vest and then gathered into a series of flat pleats in the front and then the back. In this image, you can see that the flat pleats are top-stitched on the shoulder portion of the surcoat and then allowed to hang freely, but belted in position with a narrow belt. The surcoat is an overgarment worn in the Middle Ages. Here's an example pictured in the Allegory of April, Triumph of Venus detail by Italian Renaissance painter Francesco del Casa from the 15th century. The surcoat would often be belted either around the waist of the garment or only partially to allow the cape to hang at the back. Poor Tyrion, just when he thinks he might be safe, he's captured by Jorah, facing a series of attacks until he finally arrives in Meereen. I did notice that while his costume gets a bit buggered up like in episodes 4 and 5, Sons of the Harpy and Kill the Boy, his boots still keep their sheen and luster. It's really in episode 9, The Dance of Dragons, that we see Tyrion pivot. You could argue that his change in palette marks his change in allegiance, as I've seen suggested in numerous articles, but I don't think this is really where the design team is coming from. Tyrion's turning point was in the works long before he stepped foot in Meereen, and that it was his arrest and subsequent trial, and then betrayal by his mistress and father that severed any ties he might have had to the Lannisters. There are also more practical reasons to see the change in Tyrion's wardrobe. Like Arya Stark, Tyrion adapts to the places he's in, as actor Peter Dinklage has stated. The colors are in keeping with the local customs where in a hot, dry climate, you would wear lighter weight fabrics and colors. Boiled leather and brocades might be appropriate in Westeros, but not so much in Essos. It's also likely that Dany had commissioned new clothes for Tyrion in the same way that she had clothes tailored for her brother. And while she used lighter weight materials like printed silk, she would still have the clothes tailored the way he likes them, perhaps to make him feel a little more at home in such a strange place. And you'll notice that he's also ditched the silk stock tie since it's likely too hot to wear it. Here's an Entertainment Weekly spread featuring Tyrion's new look, a golden green silk jerkin and tan breeches. Here's another look for Tyrion, another jerkin. It looks like it's made from sari silk, featuring diamond-shaped embellishments instead of the clasps that we see typically on the Lannister jackets. And he's wearing these with black laced-up breeches and a skinny belt. In the Season 6 debut, The Red Woman, Tyrion returns to wearing this Pantoshi surcoat. It's been cleaned up since he last wore it. We also see him back in this look for Season 5 in the episode Home, and in this printed silk jerkin seen here in episode 3. In the episode No One, Tyrion adds this hooded cloak to the look. The cloak is made from this very pretty basket weave woven cloth. Tyrion acquires a few new looks for Season 6. So in the episode The Door, Tyrion wears this woven silk jerkin with a brown linen shirt, albeit briefly, when he meets the Red Priestess Kinvara. And then a gorgeous brocade vest. This look in episode 4 sort of sidesteps around Tyrion's current path. I suspect that as de facto leader of Meereen and negotiator in Dany's absence, Tyrion has decided that he needs to dress the part and goes back to dressing in finery, although the palette is still neutral and subdued. He wears it with the same brown shirt and tan pants. This stunning fabric is more than likely Banarasi silk brocade. This is the same type of cloth that many of Joffrey Baratheon's costumes were made from. This type of silk is made in the city of Varanasi, northern India. Here's an example of a traditional Banarasi sari with gold brocade. In the season finale, The Winds of Winter, both Dany and Tyrion are dressed in darker shades, but still not yet black. So Clapton has stated in an interview that Dany's outfit is pewter gray and Tyrion's is about the same shade. The fabric of his jerkin looks like ostrich leather. They have not set out on their journey as of yet, but Clapton has stated that the shutting down of color is to indicate the seriousness of the ensuing battles and then ultimately the prophesized war for the dawn. This moment, of course, is marked by Dany's placement of the Hand of the Queen pin on Tyrion's left side, worn over his heart. In the Season 7 premiere Dragonstone, Tyrion is back to black leathers, simple and subdued without any front closures or lacings. His entire Essos wardrobe is gone, and once again, Clapton has introduced a series of mix and match separates. This jerkin is worn with striped brocade sleeves. But the most notable item, of course, is the silver Hand of the Queen brooch that Dany presented Tyrion with in Season 6. All of the jewelry introduced in Season 7 for Dany's team is silver. He wears this ensemble again in the episode Beyond the Wall with his usual black breeches, narrow dress belt and boots, which have been the same design since Season 1. In the episode The Queen's Justice, Tyrion wears the vest and sleeves in reverse, inverted chevron striped brocade jerkin with leather sleeves. This is a bit more of a formal look when Tyrion greets Jon Snow on the beach. In keeping with Game of Thrones quality construction, the stripes match up perfectly at the center front, creating this chevron pattern. If you'll look closely, you'll see that the stripes have a hint of blue. Here's a close-up of the brocade, the only color Tyrion wears all season. I mentioned this before in another video, but in case you missed it, Game of Thrones is known for its symbolism, and the chevron is one symbol that might hold some meaning. Putting my tinfoil hat on for a moment, both the Night's King and Tyrion both have chevrons incorporated into their clothing. In heraldry, the chevron is an inverted V that represents the roof of a house, derived from the French word chevron meaning rafter. And among the Celts, the shape acted as the mark of a warrior or hunter, or someone in the community who was a builder. So you might glean that the reason Tyrion has an inverted chevron is that he is the ultimate negotiator, always trying to find solutions through diplomatic means. Here's more leather in The Queen's Justice and in The Spoils of War. Tyrion wears a black Pantoshi-style surcoat over his leathers for his meeting with Jaime in the Red Keep in the episode Eastwatch. In the season finale, The Dragon and the Wolf, Tyrion wears a black leather jacket that looks like ostrich. In this shot, you can really see the texture. The fabric has been hammered on the reverse side, leaving small little square punctures. The texture of Tyrion's doublet is actually similar to the cheese grater texture of the Night King and fellow White Walkers. I'm excited to see where Game of Thrones and the design team will take Tyrion next when we move into Season 8 in 2019. That completes this episode of Costume Co. If you enjoyed this video, please share it out with your friends. I'll have more dedicated Game of Thrones videos coming your way before we get to Season 8. And as always, thank you so much for watching.